Hello, 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 hello. Good morning. I am John Beckman, Professor John Beckman, Dr. John Beckman, the father of Sid, the transgenic mother of sin, your hostess with the mostest. It is not Memorial Day, it's Labor Day. Labor Day. It's Labor Day today. Labor Day is the only day when I can come to work and not be bothered all day long. Let's proceed with a speed critique of the Knolled bones. Trust me, I'm a doctor. This one's very good. I like the border of the chain, but I have a recommendation. I think the chain would look a little bit better if it was lighter. So it's so dark, it's so pure black that the pure blackness doesn't fit within the rest of the picture. Like it's the darkest element, and so it's actually stealing attention from the bones. Like all my eye focuses on is the chain. So to fix this, I would have probably done something like I'm debating. I'm trying to figure out how I would solve this riddle. How to keep the chain, keep the element, but lighten it up a little bit. I've done chains a lot in some other artworks. Like you could do something like this. Otherwise, you could try to do the chain like this and see if you like that better. Like a steel chain as opposed to like a black chain. I don't want to do this all the way around, but I'm very tempted to see like what an estimate of it would look like. Obviously, I'm not doing this perfect. I'm just trying to lighten it up to see if it would fit a little bit better. You know what I'm thinking about. Also, what's really weird is your chain is not casting a shadow, but your bones are. I don't know why you need to have the chain cast a shadow too. Also, that would have been a really cool opportunity because the shadow of the chain would be really cool. The shadow that the chain casts would be like a secondary chain underneath, something like this. Like, and that would be really cool. I might as well just open this in Photoshop. This spot here is, I think, a little weird. I think it should be more like the shadow might be more something like this, or let's see, where's your shadows? It would be something like that. All right, here's your chain layer. Let me see this. Oh, you got a lot of stuff on this. Ooh, kind of interesting. All right, I got this chain isolated. Let's see here. Let's try a white chain with a shadow. Is that better? Tough to say. Now I kind of like the black one. Let me try. Let's try a quick color lighten. A gray chain. Ooh, that's pretty sexy. I don't know. I think they're both good. I don't have any complaints. This one's very good. I can't think of any way to make it better. Maybe a little bit of texture on the background, but I'm really just pulling teeth here. I think I do like the white one better, but I think so I don't know what's best. I'm just did some experiments. So this is yours. Here's where I inverted the chain and dropped a shadow. Here's where I inverted the chain, put it on top of your black chain, moved it a little bit to the right so I still maintain a little black line, and then dropped a shadow. I still do think that the chain detracts from the bones, but the chain's also like an attention hog. So if this is sitting next to other pieces, everybody's eyes is going to be drawn to that chain. So that can be a good thing or that can be a bad thing. I don't know which of these is best. The black chain feels much more tight and enclosed, like you're stuck in that area. The white chains are a bit more freeing, like you can your eyes feel more free to sort of like exit the space. No right or wrong here. Very good piece. I can't make it any better. I really can't. I can't decide if I even made an improvement or not. Good job. Okay, I need to go to the next one. I spent like, good God, 30 minutes just studying that piece. Okay. All right, this one is really good. The texture of your bones is phenomenal. Like I could not do this better myself. The texture is like 10 out of 10. But I do think your composition is not totally complete. Right? You didn't fulfill the assignment of having some kind of a decorative border. And part of that is trying to figure out how to solve that. Like that's a puzzle that you need to figure out how to solve. So I have to admit, I'm a little irked that I feel like it's not complete. But I couldn't do better myself. This is phenomenal. These are so interesting. So for everybody, I'm pretty sure these are hand-drawn shadows. I'm pretty sure these are hand-drawn shadows. So everybody should take a look at what is being done here. She's got this thing like this and this thing like this on this weird bone. And then underneath, she's distorting the shadow a little bit to be further away, like underneath. And that shows you that this thing is standing high up. Whereas when the shadows cast low, it's actually touching the ground. So 10 out of 10 shadows. Excellent. Everybody should kind of look at this as like here's how you do bones. Very good. But I think your composition is missing just something. You didn't even sign it. You don't even have like a signature. So in that sense, it feels incomplete. All right. This is the same issue as the chain for me. The barbed wire is too fat. It's taking up so much. It's not proportional either. Like look at the skull. The skull, if this was really the skull of a elk or something, like barbed wire would be like at most this thickness in terms of like proportionality. So the thick barbed wire is from a different universe and it's totally detracting from your bones. I think this is the same issue as I had with the cat chain. The knolling is good. The piece looks good. I think one of the problems for me is all your gray wash. Your gray wash is pretty poor in a sense of there isn't a lot of contrast. It's very flat. You don't have enough shades of gray. Remember I said 49 are permitted. You only have one or two shades of gray. Okay, that is not enough to show three-dimensionality. So you need to work on your gray washing to boost the contours of your shapes. They don't look 3D, they look flat. And I think that you might be going for that, but I think that was a mistake that you can fix. Also, like if you do a drop shadow, so this person did a drop shadow on essentially like all the bones. I think that works quick in a sense you can get the assignment done, but it doesn't succeed in the sense that these antlers would be standing like way further off the canvas. And so the shadow of these antlers, like it would be something like draping around and casting a shadow even over top your other bones, something like this. And that would have been like really cool. Again, just sort of like a missed opportunity to hand draw some shadows on the more complex pieces that are structurally standing off, especially the skull, because you really want to like highlight the skull. I also think proportionally it seems off. Like the vertebrae are bigger than the skull. So I think your proportion is out of whack. So this person needs to work on gray wash, proportions, and shadows. but it's a good piece. The biggest question mark for me is the font. That's the biggest question mark for me. But you did take note in a sense of your handwriting your font, which is good. So it's not like it's totally out of place and it fits within the color scheme. It feels normal. So I'm not criticizing it that way. What I'm wondering is it the best? And I think I would like to see some other options tried before I settle on that. And anytime you write something, text is such a, again, like one thing that I feel like people are not realizing is you need to think about what in your piece wants to hog the attention and how to distribute that attention evenly or not. And so the problem is there's two attention hogs. There's kind of like three attention hogs in this piece. One is a skull, one is the text, and then the other is sort of like following the spiral down into the middle. And if you don't want the text to be an attention hog, you have to figure out how to mold it more within the piece so that it fades into the background. So it's there if people want to see it, but it's not necessarily hogging the attention. Like if you were to quantify where my eye's looking, it's like 75% of the time up here. And this is the least interesting piece of this. So I do think the text is not the right font. I think your signature is a better font. Like it's there if I want to see it, but it's not detracting. I think naturally what you want is you want your viewer to start at the skull and then spiral inward. But this is great. This is a great piece. This is a 10 out of 10. I think the skull you could do better on contour and probably some gray washing. You can use your tones more to shape more contrast. So work on contrast and work on shaping the three-dimensionality of that surface. Because I think you could do a little bit better here. Also too, like at the end, like that beak, that thing that looks like that, it feels like, oh my God. This beak feels like flat. It feels very flat, not three-dimensional. Inside the eye socket feels very flat, not three-dimensional. So I think you need to work on your contrast and your 3D. But this is a very good piece. I think you could just tweak it a little bit more. Very good. This is a huge improvement from week 1. Excellent work. All right, this one is good, but the contrast is not enough. And I also think the texture is too smooth for bones. Bones are gonna have pock marks, fractures, jagged edges, pivots. It's too smooth. And typically if you look into the eye socket of a skull, there's typically like you can typically like see like other structures in there. The way that it kind of spirals down into like a tiny hole, it's not as convincing for me. I'd like to see some like deeper shadows. Like, I mean, I'm just scratching, but I'd like to see some deep shadows on this thing in parts. Give it a little bit more personality, a little bit more uniqueness. Also, too, I think there's sort of a missed opportunity and a sense of what could be around the skull, sort of like enhancing the aesthetic, if that makes sense. You know, stuff like that, I think that already like makes it a little bit better. But it's good work. I think you just need to do just a little bit more. All right, this one. You got good texture, okay? You got good texture, but there's essentially like no three-dimensionality. It's very flat. So you need to work on gray wash to shade the contours of three-dimensionality. Flatness can work on a line drawing, so like I think this can work, and I like the composition, but it feels very sketchy. It feels very like you're not capturing the details. So I'm listing things you need to work on. Gray wash. Try to get out of the flatness. Like that isn't an aesthetic in some sense. Some people like to draw that way, but just make sure that you can do three-dimensional if you want to. The details, again, also some people like to abstract, but try to make sure you can do the details if you need to. And you're starting to get at it here with some of these bones. These feet are pretty weak. There's no shadows. There's no border. I think the composition is good. The composition is well organized and it feels good. That's one reason why it's visually appealing. It's knolled well. But there are some of these things that you really need to work on. some gray wash, details, shadows, and finishing the composition to the specifications of the assignment. But it's good. All right, I like this one a lot. This one has a lot of style. It feels very punk skateboardy. Like it feels like it has that style. Like this would be a really cool like under skateboard image. But there are some things that I don't dig. I don't dig the border, it doesn't fit. The border you're doing like it's from a totally different universe. So I don't dig the border. The text bizarrely I like. I like it a lot. For some reason it works for me. Things you need to work on, this is actually pretty good contour in this bone. But you're not replicating that contour in the skull, which is a missed opportunity. So you need to continue to push the gray wash. Like you did it, you demonstrated that you can do it here, but you should be doing that level of impact on your most important elements. I also think the skull feels a bit flat compared to the other bones. The other bones feel pretty three-dimensional. The skull, in contrast, feels like it's a flat piece of paper that you just set down. And that's because a couple things. You're not positioning the skull properly. Like actually that skull, it should probably look something more, okay, like I'm quickly doing it, but it should be, the position of it should be something more like this. Whereas you have it like you like took a picture of like the side profile and then you like put it on a flat piece of paper and just like pasted it there. But in reality, it would be like sitting on top and your shadow would be cast this way. So I think if you would have drawn the skull more like this, I think that would have really completed the piece. But I dig the skull. It's not that I don't like it. I like it. It has a really cool aesthetic. You have a really unique style and try not to lose that. But also make sure that you can do the other things that you want to be able to do. But this is good. For some reason, this makes me think of like Castlevania or like Zelda. Like the colors are like things you'd find in that game. Almost like it feels like a candles. Compliments I have are that all the pieces fit perfectly. This is really good design, and it's a really unique style, and you figured out how to do it and keep the style consistent throughout. So that's very good, especially with the border. It's a good border. I think there's a missed opportunity in the shadows. In a sense of the shadows for the things that are laying flat look right, but for the skull, the shadows should be bigger because it's coming off more, and the shadows over here should be bigger. So these should cast a shadow something more like this. Like there'd be, and the femurs, they'd have a little bit bigger shadow. So if you do the drop shadow effect, it's always important to come back in later and customize some of the shadows for some of the other things that would be a little bit more robust. I also think down here, there's a little bit of an opportunity that was missed here to do a little bit more hand shadow work. Like something like increasing the shadows like this, I think would improve the piece. But this is a great piece. You did a really good job. The skull, the other thing I'm noticing is so again, like I think it's stylistically it works, but I think you also need to work on texture. You don't have any texture in your bones. And you need to work on the gray wash contour. Like the skull and the hip, that's really an opportunity for gray wash. You got a little bit of contour here, which works, but I think you could push it a little bit more in the big elements. I love this one. This one is so good. It's very consistent stylistically. It's very nice. It's knolled really well. The composition is excellent. Perfect. I do think there's room for improvement. I think there's room for improvement in the shadows. I think this skull would cast a shadow looking something like this. Like, there's really, like, a missed opportunity in the sense of you could do some really cool shadows with this skull, with this hip, with this thing. Oh, this would be so cool if, like, you had your shadows from this thing and they were cast on top of that skull a little bit. I'm just doing it quick, but something like this, because that's sitting up like that. That could have been really cool. These ribs, they come up a little bit, I think, unless they're sitting perfectly flat. So I think there's a missed opportunity to do some better shadow work. The border's good. It fits right with your signature. That's good. I love this piece. It's really good. But there is some room for improvement. Also, there is some improvement that you need to learn contrast a little bit more. Stylistically, what you have makes sense. Like, you weren't going for a high contrast piece, but make sure that you can do high contrast when you want to. I think in here there'd be a little bit more something. I don't know, deep pockets or some weird stuff in there. Also, how like you need to start making like you're very good, but you need to start making style point decisions. So like how often is it that you see a skeleton with perfect teeth? It's it's never happens. So like knock out some of these teeth. And then it just gives it a little bit extra flair. So work on shadows, work on contrast, work on a little bit of extra flair. Very nice. So artistically, I give this piece a 10 out of 10. Artistically, this is really good. Like in the sense of it's consistent, it feels good, the border fits with the bones. Your signature is incredibly interesting and unique and fits within the piece. So stylistically, this is a 10 out of 10. You got good texture in the background that fits. In terms of sort of scientific illustration, there are some things that you want to make sure that you can do. The it you're not capturing a lot of the detail. And I think what you inherently do is you sort of like extract the essence, which is good if you're going to do cartoons or if you're going to do like illustration in Illustrator, which we will do later. So I think you have a natural talent for that. But also make sure that you can do the detail when you need to. So for the next time, I want you to try to focus on seeing the details, getting the details done. You have a good sense of how to organize the composition. You're using the negative space well. Your shadows are pretty weak. Texture of the bones is interesting. Like nobody else is using this sort of tactic. Whatever you're doing here, it's interesting. So I think you do have good texture. But the shape, the contours, everything is very flat. And so if you're going for that, that's great. But make sure you can do three-dimensional if you need to. And three-dimensional is all about the shadows and the contours in the gray washing. But it's a very nice piece. I like it. It's very good. It's very complete. This one is really good, but I think you made a key mistake. And the key mistake is to leave your bones the same color as your background. Your background is pure white and your bones are pure white. And I think that's a mistake. It makes it so that I can't really tell what's background and what's bones. So I would have done an underlayer and I would have just quickly colored in at least some kind of like a sepia tone and then done a drop shadow. So you don't have any shadows and the color of the bones is missing. You just very weak gray washing in the sense of you've got blacks and a gray. That's kind of it. You kind of got black, gray, white. You have essentially like three colors. That's not going to work for enough detail for how much detail this piece requires. The knolling is good. The piece is good, and you're using the bones to kind of construct your frame, which is really nice. Like I really like this one. I think you just need to do a little bit more shadows, a bit of coloration in the bones, and a bit of texture in the bones. So I think there's some things that you're missing. This is very good. This is a very good improvement from week one. The composition is pretty tight. Like it's well placed. I like the text works. The text works. It fits. You're going for kind of like a photorealistic style. The texture on the skull is very nice. I think where you need to work on is you need more contrast. So this is demonstrating to me that you can draw, you got a good eye, you can see what you're doing, you can see the details, but you need to work on the contrast. You need to push the shadows more. So shadows and contrast. Here, like these shadows are good, but I don't think they're dark enough. Like something like this, I think is gonna be better. Don't be afraid of don't be afraid to use real dark blacks. But compositionally, it's very clean. It's very good. It's nice. It's a nice piece. It's a huge improvement from week one. Very good. All right, this one. A+ on color choice. Good color choice here. It feels very good. I'm not sure what I think about this border. Sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't. Like it feels like I don't know, it feels like the bubble universe invading the bone universe. I can't tell. I can't tell if I like it or not. I think what I don't like about it is I think that I don't like that these lines in theory would come off. Like they would come off the composition. And so I feel like there's something there that I can't see. And so I think my advice would be when next time you do a border, if you ever do a border again, try to make the border like all complete within the piece. I don't like to see elements like if you have like an image, I don't like to see any elements that seem as if they would extend past the page. I think it makes the viewer pretty uncomfortable. I think your bones are harshly outlined in drawing, and then your shadows are very blurry. And so if this were me, I would have hand drawn some shadows that fit within the style of how you've drawn these bones. Like have your shadow style match the universe of your bones, if that makes sense. I think this skull needs a little work. I don't know what's going on here. If this is the eye socket, I think there's some room here. Probably some room here for some cracks, you know, stuff like that. But this is great. It's good. I think you made a good decision in terms of like it looks much better like this than it did Knolled. Like when you do the knolling, it made it work. It makes the image work. So I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you also increased the size of the bones. That was good. That was a good decision. It worked well. But I'm not sure about that border. I think it's a one piece that's I'm not sure about. I also don't know if I like how close these two key bones are to the edge. Like I feel like maybe you would want to move this thing somewhere over here and clear space. And this thing's a very interesting like hip thing. I think you want to move that into the piece more. So I don't like that these two of the coolest elements are shoved to the side. And I think that could improve the piece a little bit. But this is great. You did a good job. Although there's no armadillo shell. What happened with that? Just a little bit of a missed opportunity there. I'm sure you tried and maybe it was very difficult. All right, we got the narwhal here. The border's good. Good border. It fits. The signature fits within the lines on the bones. It's good. I think what's lacking in the piece are the shadows and the contrast. You've really only got dark contrast with the lines, but you don't have any solid blocks of shadows like that would really pop the contrast. So I think that's what's a little bit lacking is it feels a little bit flat. So you need to work on shadows and contrast in the future. The texture on the bones is great. I think you could harshen the gray washes. Harshen the contours. And I think that would make it a little bit less flat. I think you could also here, there's some room for some real white highlights. So if you came in and did something like I'm sloppily doing it, but I think there's some room for adding some white highlights in some of these spots. Like I'm just quickly I think something like this, again, that's gonna like push the contours a little bit. So I'm gonna add to this list of things that you should think about are highlights. And you can do those last and they don't take much time. But I think again, something like that, I think that adds a lot actually. Especially in the narwhal tooth. That was an opportunity for some highlights. Also, what would be cool is if the narwhal tooth was sort of like lifted up a little bit off, and then you could that would really be an opportunity for a really interesting shadow that would maybe come across like this or something. If it was popped up a little bit. I don't know if they're curved at all or if it was angled. Very good though. All right, this one's good. I like that it's almost like the bones encapsulate the personality of the eel, like it's sharp, fine, sharp cutting with prickly personality. Like I like that. There's a couple things that I'm not sure about. This text, like why wouldn't you just it's slanted. Why wouldn't you just take that text and then rotate it so that it's perfectly flat? I'm not sure I'm digging that sort of like haphazard like angular text. The border's great. The border works really well and the texture on the background works really well. Although this text feels different than this text, although they're close. Like they're pretty close, so I think you did a decent job. I don't know if you typed this, but if it were me, I would pick that font and then I would just write over top the font because at least then that would make this text perfectly consistent with this text. That's one of a pet peeve. Your signature looks good. I think there's a missed opportunity on the shadows. So things you need to work on are shadows. Your contrast is good. Like you've got really good contrast in the skull. The skull is very interesting. But I think your contrast is lacking in terms of shadows. You could do a little bit more interesting, like these would be an interesting opportunity for weird shadows like this or something. Like that could have been, that's kind of a missed opportunity. That could have been really cool. So in that sense, it feels a little bit flat. So you need to work on your three-dimensionality. Do these things, and I think you'll be doing even more amazing things in no time. This is great though. Very good. I'm really impressed with the pieces this year. It's great. All right, this one, my biggest problem is the border, just a square. That's a no-no. Unless you can pull it off, but it feels very forced. The border feels very forced. So you got to work on that. The contours are good. You got good gray wash, you got good three-dimensionality, you've got good shape. I think your shadows are the shadows are good. I was debating, like I was maybe thinking like maybe your shadows aren't dark enough. I think the shadows are okay, but I think the problem for me is this white background. I do not dig the white background. I think you need some kind of like some like piece of parchment or something that they're sitting on. I think that always makes things look a little bit better. Something like this. Like I think that kind of a border is going to work better than this sort of haphazard square. And then if you put some texture on the underside, I think that would make your bones a little bit better. So there's a couple of things I think you need to do to push this to the 10, but you're pretty close. Your drawing is good. You just need to finish your compositional design and make better decisions about composition. It's close though. Very close. All right, I like this one a lot. This is a great one. It feels very metal. I like that. The composition is great. It almost this is really cool in a sense of like what you're doing here. It actually almost looks like a seal or like you know, like on a shield, like you see like an eagle or something. So it's like you took the tiger bones and made like an eagle. I like that a lot. So your composition is great. Very good composition. I think you need some texture on this gray background. I think that would help you a lot. Yeah, because this gray background, this gray sort of like perfect square, it doesn't fit right. I would also take an eraser and I would erase sort of like chunks of this edge to make it a little bit more jagged, this gray edge. Like I would make this gray edge jagged. Then it would fit more with your white rip marks. Like I would do something like this. Make that gray like this. So it's not just a perfect geometrical square. that perfect geometrical square is messing up the rest of your composition. Like I would do something like this, and that would make it, that would push it 10 out of 10, a little bit further. I'm not sure that I like how you positioned this text. Like, here's why it doesn't feel right, is because the Knolled bones are very well organized, like OCD organized. And then the text is sort of like disorganized. So I don't think that that fits within the piece. I think what you should have done is you should have taken this and you should have rotated it and moved it a little bit to the right and shrunk it so that it would have been written something like this. And then you would do tigress, tigress right here in this space. So you've got this perfect like framed space for your title, framed by the bones. And so I think it's a mistake the way that you wrote it. I think it would look better if you wrote it perfectly like that. Like, and I didn't draw it here perfectly, but I would, if it were me, I would write it like this. And you should be able to do that in your Photoshop program, and I think it will look better. That might be worth tweaking. Let me try to tweak this file for a sec. All right, now which of these do you like better? I feel like this one's a little bit better. Great work. All right, this one, good color. Good color. Very nice. Your texture's good. Your shadows are tight. That's good. I'm not digging that this background, this texture of this background comes beyond the border. I think this should be erased outside the border. That's my one problem. I also don't like, this is a bizarre thing, but I don't like these filled in triangles at the edges. I don't like that for some reason. Those are the only modifications that I would do. Composition, I think you did a really good job strategically placing things. It's great. Those are the only complaints that I have. This one's very nice. Okay. This one is the same issue as the chain cat, and the barbed wire elk. The black border is too dark. Okay. And if you're gonna do this black border, you started to fix it here. This was a good decision where you're pulling these bones over the edge of the border. That makes the border less oppressive. And you're writing in here, that's good. That's really good. So I think you kind of sensed that this black border was a little bit overwhelming. I would pull these ribs to the right a little bit so they're breaking up this border. Ditto here. You could also do that with these femurs, or do something different with the border. The borders is just a little bit oppressive. What you might be able to do, here's an interesting idea. Actually, I'm gonna try to download this one. So something like this is, I think, a little bit less oppressive. This border is, I think, more successful than this one. Just like fraying the edges of that border so it's less oppressive is going to help you a lot, I think. I also think I think there's some conflicting styles here. Like, these are like photorealistic bone texture. So you're very good. You know how to do texture. You can do photorealistic bones. But then what's weird is like the skull is not photorealistic, and these are the hips. The hips are not or the tops of, I don't know if these are the tops of like femurs or what, but they're not photorealistic. So you're combining different styles. Or I don't know if you switched from one style to another midway through and you just didn't have enough time to go back. And in that case, you're learning, that's good. But you have to avoid, like, what's breaking it for me is that you're combining sort of like different styles. And I think it would be a more successful piece if the skull, for instance, looked like this bone here. But it's super good. I would, again, also too, there's room for style here where like you could knock out some of these teeth. The teeth are too perfect. The inside of the eye cavity is a little bit awkward. It's probably going to be more something like you're going to have, like I think you're trying to do cross hatching, but it's a little bit awkward with these lines. So you must have switched styles halfway through. But there's some opportunity here for some flair. And there's an opportunity for keeping the styles consistent. But this is nice. Did a great job. All right, here's mine. I think mine's pretty sexy, although there's a few. I think the lines on the piranha skull are a bit. I think they're a bit too thick, just by a hair. I think the composition is pretty tight. My border is really good. I'm really proud of my border this year, and my text choice is really good. My signature fits within the scheme. The composition is really good. I think this is the best Knolled bones I've ever done. Let's compare my Knolled bones. Let's compare. So I've done this challenge now 3 times. Like, you can definitely tell they're mine. You can definitely see my style coming out. This one was the mouse. Or no, it was a rat. I think it was a rat. This one was the platypus. This one was the piranha. I like these. I should make a book of these. All right. I'm happy. Have a good Labor Day.
Investigate real time.